Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Young heroes.
I heard the little girl say, "My sister's drowning."
How the quick thinking of 3 young boys saved the life of a Kootenay toddler. Plus, backing down.
We will build the best and most accountable police department we can.
A turning point for Surrey's mayor as the city finally moves forward with transitioning to a local police force. And hot heat.
Hopefully this is just a glimpse of what's coming in the future and that we can start to adapt.
BC and the rest of the country sets new records for a hot, dry summer.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Lien Yeung. Anita is away tonight. Thanks for joining us. Some major kudos for 2 boys and their dad. They are being credited with saving the life of a 3-year-old girl. The little girl was in Wassa Lake near Cranbrook when she nearly drowned. As CBC's Corey Bullock reports, what was supposed to be a normal day on the beach quickly turned into an emergency.
What started as a day of fun on the beach quickly turned into a startling scene for a group of young boys.
There's this little sand spot that goes out really far, and we went to go like halfway, and then we saw these 2 boys and a girl. They were all crying, and I heard the little girl say, "My sister's drowning," so I told these 2, my brother and my friend, to go get my dad and his dad.
His dad, Chris Pearson, credits the boys with saving the toddler's life.
If it wasn't for those kids, this would be a different story.
This guy came running and dived in to get the girl. He didn't have much gas left, so my dad and his dad were already swimming there, and they helped them out, and then they just kept passing the girl until they got to shore, and his dad did CPR.
That's when things took a turn.
Laid her down on the wet sand, and instantly Jason started doing compressions and mouth-to-mouth. And I think he did that for about 5 minutes. And all of a sudden she started gurgling and coughing up a huge amount of water and seaweed. And then eventually her nose started bleeding and there was blood. And then she started crying, and everybody was pretty happy.
According to a report from the BC Coroner's Service, there were 86 accidental drowning deaths in BC last year. Luckily, the toddler was taken to hospital and is now in stable condition, according to the RCMP. But Pearson says it's a stark reminder of water safety.
We all think Wassa is a pretty safe little lake, and in a matter of minutes, things can change.
And now the boys and their fathers are being praised for their efforts. Well, the police said you guys really helped save her life. How do you feel about that?
Happy.
A happy ending, indeed. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
New numbers from Statistics Canada show crime rates are rising for most of the country, including here in BC. The Crime Severity Index takes into account the severity and volume of crime over time, with data showing 3.6% increase in BC compared to last year. The province's Violent Crime Severity Index, meanwhile, is up 5.1%, and the youth crime rate is also increasing. As CBC's Terry Reith reports, across Canada, the increases center on robbery, homicide, and extortion.
One of the most troubling increases is the 8% year-over-year jump in homicides. 874 people killed in 2022. That's 78 more than the year before. Gang violence, particularly with firearms, accounted for a quarter of those cases. There's also a troubling rise in spousal violence.
The proportion of women who were killed by their spouse or intimate partner was approximately 11 times higher than the proportion of men.
Other crimes on the rise, a 15% increase in robberies, a 39% jump in extortion cases.
Extortion is when there's like threats that are accompanying like a fraud, for example, or threats that are used in accompanying another type of violation.
The largest increases in crime were in the West, particularly Manitoba, which recorded a 14% increase. As to why, as with everything, it's complicated. Economic issues, unemployment, and housing issues are all key factors.
We must begin to pay more attention to social welfare services. Those are inadequate as we speak, and the results are showing.
Overall, violent crime is at its highest level since 2007. So, should Canadians be worried? Well, maybe a little, but the criminologist says Canada still ranks as one of the safest places in the world to live. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
The saga of Surrey's police force appears to finally be coming to an end. Mayor Brenda Locke seems to have relented and is moving forward with the transition to a regional force. It comes after Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth gave his final decision last week. As Mira Baines reports, the mayor addressed a tense Surrey Police Board meeting last night.
In what seems like a turning point in the public debate on Surrey policing, Mayor Brenda Locke delivered a statement to the Surrey Police Board last night.
It is my goal that given these challenging circumstances, we will build the best and most accountable police department we can.
Locke campaigned on the promise to go back to the RCMP force, and the issue has been contentious. Yesterday, she set the tone as the city moves forward with the SPS.
To date, this board has made it a deliberate position that they build a wall and even offend the city of Surrey through their work. That posturing must stop today.
The mayor's office confirmed she will be meeting with the province's appointed strategic implementation advisor next week. Former BC Hydro CEO Jessica McDonald will be taking on the role. The Surrey Police Service says the force is preparing for more hiring.
The recruiting section now is on standby, ready to ramp up once we have a plan together with the three levels of government, the RCMP, and then we'll be able to move forward.
SPS confirmed it will also be meeting with McDonald on next steps. Locke has said a big issue is the cost of a city police force. An independent cost analysis commissioned by the province shows a municipal police force will cost the city $30 million more per year than the RCMP would. The province has said it will still provide $150 million to the city to help with policing costs. So far, the city says the extra costs for having both the RCMP and SPS operating is $8 million a month. About $60 million in extra money since December when the city decided to transition back to the RCMP. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth met with Locke earlier this week. In a statement, he said, Mayor Locke and I had a frank discussion that was respectful and productive. Now that the decision has been made, I am hopeful that we will find a way to move forward together. Mayor Locke has not held a news conference since the province's final decision, and it appears the transition to SPS is back on. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Confusion and frustration with BC Ferries continues. Around 3 o'clock this afternoon, its website said passengers without a reservation can't get on the Tsawwassen-Swartz Bay route until 6 a.m. tomorrow. But on Twitter, it said standby traffic is seeing a 2 to 3 sailing wait, and it was possible standby vehicles could load earlier. The disparity led to some passengers not showing up, even though wait times would have been shorter. Earlier this week, BC Ferries apologized for its website overstating sailing waits. It says passengers can get up-to-date information on Twitter. Overhauled his cabinet yesterday, the lone new minister from BC was back home today in his riding of Burnaby North Seymour.
No matter what my title is, both I and Minister Sajan are responsible for serving you. You are all the bosses, no matter what our titles are. So please, for everybody here today, please know that we want to hear your good ideas. We want to know how we can serve the community better, and please call me Terry.
The new Minister of Citizen Services, Terry Beach, was joined by Minister Harjit Sajjan for a funding announcement. $20 million for 7 businesses in the Burnaby area, including nearly $2 million for BCIT alone. Ottawa says Beach will be responsible for Service Canada and any services the feds provide directly to Canadians, such as passport applications. It's been a dry and hot spring, followed by a dry and hot summer, and that's led to significant drought conditions across the province. And Joel Ballard joins me now with more on this. So, Joel, we know the situation is dire, but how does this year's situation compare to last year's?
Well, if you take a look at the current drought map for BC, 23 of BC's 34 regions are in drought level 4 or 5, where adverse effects are likely or almost certain. But if you look at last year's map for July 15th, it paints a much different picture. Drought wasn't an issue. Even that small patch of yellow is only drought level 1. Now let's look at the same day in 2021. The drought conditions, far worse than 2022, but nowhere near as bad as what we're seeing right now. And it's important to note that the province considered 2021 a very bad year for drought. Fortunately, we did have some rain this week.
It will provide some temporary relief for flows, but not necessarily long-term lasting. If we were to get 2 to 3 more of those events, especially province-wide, we may be able to get out of the drought, but typically that's not what happens at this time of year.
And the forecast confirms that, with more warm, dry weather on its way.
So, Joel, we've heard a lot about the immediate impacts of this drought, but what could it mean for the long term for this province?
The answer is unclear. The province has warned that these conditions are unprecedented. It doesn't have past data to use as a magic 8-ball. And unfortunately, this drought appears to have legs.
It is possible for the drought conditions to carry through the fall and winter into the next year if we don't see the level of rainfall that we need, particularly in the fall.
Now, I had the chance to speak with Sean Smuckler from UBC's Centre for Sustainable Food Systems. He says the impacts of the drought could be widespread and lasting. We're already seeing how the agriculture sector has been hit. The industry requires lots of water. Ranchers can't grow or source enough feed and hay and are having to sell or shrink their herds. But he also says urban life depends on steady access to water. And then there's the wildlife and the impacts of drought on natural habitats, like low-flowing streams and rivers, and how that could challenge crucial species like salmon. He says the current conditions should serve as a wake-up call.
These are conditions that have been predicted by climate scientists for decades now. And so hopefully this is just a glimpse of what's coming in the future and that we can start to adapt. We have time to really adjust our production systems, our infrastructure, our policies to create a more resilient system.
For now, the message from the province remains the same, with calls for residents and businesses to reduce and limit their water use.
All right, thank you so much for that, Joel. We'll reduce where we can. That's Joel Ballard reporting for us tonight. And that rainfall that Joel mentioned there has made for some comparatively cooler conditions here on the Lower Mainland, and after weeks of hotter than average temperatures. So this data from the Meteorological Service of Canada shows for the past 30 days, the average temperature in Vancouver was 2.9 degrees higher. Not only is this considered extremely hot, it's the hottest average temperature ever recorded. And history isn't just being made here in BC. Around the world, temperatures are hitting frightening extremes with damaging and sometimes deadly effects. As Renee Filipponi explains, with the way things are going, the history books could be rewritten again and again.
Heat and humidity turned Toronto into an oven, making it feel like nearly 40 degrees Celsius, leaving everyone trying to stay cool.
I feel very lucky that I have AC in my apartment, but I know that's not the case for everyone.
Bringing a water bottle with you is good. Wearing hats, sunscreen.
Global temperature records have been breaking all summer. That heat feeding wildfires that have been destroying communities across Europe. Now, new analysis shows July is on track to be the hottest month in recorded history.
We can already say with absolute certainty that it is going to be the warmest July.
The UN Secretary General points to climate change and says it's terrifying.
The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. The air is unbreathable. The heat is unbearable.
In the U.S., where 150 million people are under heat alerts, New York has declared a state of emergency.
Heat kills more New Yorkers every year than any other kind of extreme weather event.
In Arizona, the extreme heat is being blamed for dozens of deaths. The U.S. president introduced new safety measures for workers.
Experts say extreme heat is already costing America $100 billion a year and hits our most vulnerable the hardest.
Climate scientists say this will be the norm unless people move to drastically cut fossil fuels.
We have to mitigate climate, which means we have to reduce our emissions. It's the #1 best thing we can do.
Along with the heat, this summer in Canada has been marked with unprecedented wildfires, cities drowning in smoke, and now severe drought is a reality in BC.
The level of drought that we're seeing here in British Columbia today is really quite unprecedented.
That was Renee Filipponi reporting. Meanwhile, fire officials are warning tougher times may still be ahead as several blazes threaten communities despite the recent rainfall. BC Wildfire Service says there are 394 active wildfires, down by roughly 100 since Monday. Nearly half of those are in the Prince George Fire region, and almost all were caused by lightning. Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma is urging people to be prepared and have a plan in place in case you need to evacuate your home. She says just over 1,000 people in BC are on evacuation orders, and nearly 5,500 are under an alert. And Vancouver Fire and Rescue has suspended all burn and explosive permits due to the dry weather conditions. This means, with the exception of the celebration of light, no fireworks are permitted in the city. So don't expect the usual post-game show if you're heading to see the Vancouver Canadians on Saturday. And North Vancouver Fire and Rescue is warning the public about the improper disposal of cigarettes under the current conditions. The district shared this video of a worker putting out a cigarette in a backyard where he was working. 6 hours later, just watch what happens. The cigarette starts a spark, and in just a few minutes, those hedges are completely engulfed in flames. The residents of the house did everything they could to put out the fire and called 911 immediately. North Vancouver Fire says while you may think you threw away a cigarette safely, there's a huge risk of fire if it's near vegetation. And Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. Lots on the go, Darius. What are you watching?
Well, first of all, that video is crazy.
Yeah.
And really highlights how important it is that we keep in mind that we are in a severe drought situation. When we have conditions this dry, this fire map does not show it. I wish I was showing the drought map. When we do have situations this dry, even the smallest spark can really allow a fire to fester where we can't see it. And then even days later, in that case hours, but sometimes days, it really takes off and we see those giant flames really engulf everything around. Now, the fire danger situation is not as bad as the drought situation right now, thanks to that rain we had pass through the province. It does seem like as a result of a lot of these lingering showers from the low that we had yesterday, the fire danger should stay low for the central parts of the province for at least a few days, but it is coming back up in the south and on the island because it was a really temporary rain that we had come through. I'm not expecting too much more. I'm not expecting the fire danger to stay low for a lot of these places too much longer. Now, this is the rain that we have tomorrow, again, mostly through the southern half of the central part of the province, and then tomorrow in Vancouver, really nothing but sun. Once again, pretty much the same forecast as we've had lately.
Okay, all right, good to know. We'll talk to you again in a little bit. Thanks, Darius.
Thanks.
A Kamloops woman is the province's newest multi-millionaire. She's the lucky winner of half of this month's Lotto Max jackpot. Rhonda Malescu says she purchased the lucky ticket worth a whopping $35 million at her local Walmart, and she hopes to use that windfall to design her dream home. The draw was valued at $70 million, but Malescu and another winner from Edmonton picked the same 7 numbers, meaning they're going to have to split the money. And one last success story from the recent North American Indigenous Games in Halifax. Wamish Hamilton introduces us to a Port Alberni softball player who made her way to the diamond from a very different sport.
I can
The North American Indigenous Games might be wrapped and done for 2023, but one athlete is going to keep treasuring the memories made all summer long. 13-year-old Jamie Lynn Lucas traveled to Halifax from Port Alberni and met a lot of people who needed a map to find out where she's from.
She might be from a small town that a lot of people don't recognize on a map, but she is on even playing field for the skills that she has and the determination that she's built for a love of a sport that she's built on herself.
Jamie Lynn was one of several hundred BC athletes competing in the North American Indigenous Games. Amongst the youngest on her team, she played second base in the softball team. And while the ball game was old hand for her teammates, for Jamie Lynn, it was a far cry from her original passion, gymnastics. But her gym moves played a part on the softball diamond.
I got to compete with a lot of people, and it helped me a lot with softball because I felt like flexibility really helped.
Jamie Lynn showed she was a talented gymnast when she was just 4 years old. As she advanced in that sport, the higher she went, the fewer Indigenous people she saw.
I was like the only one who was like First Nations.
And so she decided to leave gymnastics and move to a sport more familiar to those around her.
Everyone in my family does it, and I loved watching it. Softball was just something that I really wanted to get better at.
Jamie Lynn grew up watching her cousins take to the softball diamond, so she thought she'd give it a try. Her new sport fit like a comfy softball mitt, and she found a sense of belonging. But all that gymnastics training wasn't for naught.
She loves the sport, so you put all those things together with her core of the body strength that she received from her gymnastics. So it's pretty awesome to see, and it's pretty good feeling to watch her do what she does out there.
Team BC won bronze in the U16 girls division in Halifax. The next games are in Calgary in 2027, and Jamie Lynn plans to be there.
I can get emotional at times because we think of her great-grandparents that have passed on, you know, and the things that they fought for our people to be able to do this. So for our daughter to be a part of something that generations before us could not do and fought for our kids to do, you just know, it's a really good feeling.
Wamish Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Surrey's mayor is signaling she's willing to embrace the Surrey Police Service. Brenda Locke backing off on her push to reinstate the RCMP. We'll chat with a political science professor next about her moves and what it means for her mayorship after the break. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. The Rabona, an uncommon and tricky soccer move that makes the fans go crazy, could have a moment at this month's FIFA Women's World Cup. So how does it work? We turn to the Calgary Foothills Soccer Club for a breakdown.
Rabona. Hi, I'm Sarah Kinsner, and I'm a midfielder for the Foothills WFC team. I'm going to be demonstrating the Rabona. What you do is you basically hook your one leg around the other and kick the ball. What you want to do is you want to take your touch, and in this case, since I'm right foot dominant, I'm going to be planting and swinging my right leg around the ball. So when you approach the ball and you plant, you want to swing that leg around, and you kind of want to angle your foot so you end up hitting it with the laces of your foot as you come through. So you would kind of be deceiving where you would take your touch in the opposite direction of what you would normally kick with, and then you'd plant and kick the ball. I think it's just kind of tricky. Not a lot of people do it during the games, so people would expect you to just pass with your dominant foot for the most part, but it really catches defenders off guard when you just do this sneaky pass without them realizing. Usually you definitely hear a little like oohs and like, like did you see that type of reaction. And I think it also adds a little flair for the fans because they also don't see it too often, so I think it's just a really fun move. It can be a little tricky. People tell me that I can do it because I have a little bit longer legs, but I think anyone can do it. I'm so excited to watch Team Canada play. I think they are in a great group. I think they'll do really well in the tournament. Definitely Jessie Fleming. I feel like she's always been so inspiring to me, and it's always nice watching her do her thing out there.
It's Jessie Fleming who scores the goal!
It's so fun to watch so many players that I've played with growing up as well, going to some of the youth camps and stuff, so it's just so inspiring to see those girls play at the highest level there, and hopefully they'll see a few Rabona moves maybe tossed into the tournament.
Welcome back. We're going to take you back to one of the day's top stories. Mayor Brenda Locke addressed the Surrey Police Board yesterday and appeared to concede on her campaign promise to reinstate the RCMP. Her comments come after the province's public safety minister decided the city should stick with its transition to a municipal force. And for some analysis, let's bring in University of the Fraser Valley political science professor Hamish Telford. Welcome, Hamish.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Liam.
So off the bat, I want to know, what's your reaction to Brenda Locke's comments saying that she wants to build the best and most accountable police department that she can?
Well, of course, that's her job as mayor. Whichever force was put in place, she would have to do that. She seems to have acknowledged, albeit grudgingly, that the decision has been made and that she will have to work with the Surrey Police Service. She was a bit prickly with some of her colleagues on the police board last night, but the new process has started, I think, and hopefully it goes up from here.
Yeah, it certainly was a bit of a tense meeting yesterday. So this whole decision, drawn out, contentious. So how does this mayor and council then, how do you see it moving forward with the province?
Well, Brenda Locke had her meeting with the Solicitor General, Mike Farnworth, this week. She said last week when he made the decision that she was not going to speak publicly until she had that meeting. I don't imagine she went into that meeting with sort of one last-ditch attempt to change his mind. He seemed pretty firm in his decision. But I think she wanted to raise issues about the transition, in particular the cost. It is definitely going to cost more to run a municipal force than to use the RCMP. Brenda Locke has been right about that all along. The province did say that they would provide upwards of $150 million over 5 years to aid that transition. But I'm not sure how much leverage, bargaining power Surrey has at this juncture. When Mike Farnworth made his strong recommendation a couple of months ago, that might have been the opportunity to talk about money, to see if the terms could be sweetened, because theoretically there was still the possibility to go back to the RCMP. But that option's being taken off the table, which weakens her bargaining power. But we'll see how those conversations go over the next few months.
And do you think that's because the relationship has become, so tense and kind of broken through the duration of this?
That's partly it. And it's also the fact that the minister has now made his final decision. I think that the moment for bargaining has kind of passed. However, we do have an overseer to the process now, Jessica McDonald, former deputy to the premier, a very high level civil servant in British Columbia. She was also the CEO of BC Hydro. She creates a bit of a buffer now, I think, between the city council in Surrey and the BC government, the mayor and the solicitor general. And we've yet to see how she is going to play this role, but she could hopefully she will assist Surrey in that transition, but she may be able to smooth negotiations with the province as well.
And just very quickly before we wrap, so what do you think the potential impact is for Locke and her tenure now as mayor?
Well, I think this really does give her the opportunity to move forward, right? She's not a year into her mandate. There's lots of things that need to be done in Surrey, not just policing. And if she had dragged this out further with lawsuits and so forth, it could have derailed the rest of her time as mayor. So I think this does give her an opportunity to focus attention on other things that are badly needed, like transportation and infrastructure development, schools, and so on and so forth in the city.
For sure. She's got her work cut out for her. All right. Always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. UFB's Hamish Telford.
You're welcome.
And with all the recent troubles BC Ferries has experienced over the previous weeks, many were frustrated. Yasmin Gandam spoke with the mayor of Nanaimo on the cascading impacts for the island.
With cancellation, website difficulties, and one of their vessels being out of commission, one person who is watching all of this closely is the mayor of Nanaimo, Leonard Krogh. Well, when you see these issues with BC Ferries, I mean, what goes through your mind?
There's a pretty high level of frustration and angst. Look, everything within reason that most of us consume on Vancouver Island by way of food, the furniture we buy, whatever, is coming by ferry. It's being trucked to Vancouver Island. And so when the ferries are not reliable, we're the ones on the receiving end, so to speak.
I mean, what kind of impact does this have on your community when there are delays and cancellations like this?
Well, it obviously leads to potential short-term shortages depending on what's being delivered, if it's groceries, vegetables, etc. For people who are waiting for delivery of goods that they've ordered or are hoping to purchase in local stores.
While we have you here, another travel issue affecting your community is the road closures on Highway 4. What are you hearing about that?
Well, obviously, it's been extremely stressful for people who have family and a strong need to get to Port Alberni and to the West Coast generally. But what it points out is something that I've been emphasizing ever since the fire started. We have an existing rail line on Vancouver Island. This points out that if that rail line was active and available, you would be able to transport goods and people into Alberni to the West Coast very easily along the rail line as an alternate route, as opposed to expecting people to travel for hours on what were essentially logging roads.
They might be pulling in record profits, but grocery stores are saying they are facing a new and growing problem: rampant shoplifting. How they're trying to crack down. That's next.
BC landlords will soon be able to evict any tenant without cause, and within a year they'll be able to raise rents by any amount they want. Those are provisions in the legislation that accompanied a new restraint budget brought in last week by Premier Bill Bennett. And as Georges Tremel reports, the tenants of BC are mobilizing for a fight.
He bumped it up units, so now it's $5.50.
At the offices of the Consumers Association of Canada, renters were already phoning this morning about being hit by rent increases. And on another phone, this worker was rallying the troops to coordinate the counterattack.
Sharing some discussion about the implications of the recent budget.
As a result of the budget, it looks as though it's more a ministry of corporate affairs than it is consumer affairs.
Yvonne Miles calls the budget and bills that followed Hurricane Bennett.
The measures in the budget have implications that are so far-reaching and so devastating that they can't. I think the generous thing for me to say is that they weren't fully thought out.
Who wants to live with wage controls for 10 years like we lived with rent controls for 10 years? That was the problem.
Jack Hayes says rent increases will not be huge because the vacancy rate is presently high in British Columbia. But even the landlords are concerned about the possible eviction of renters without cause. One fear is that the court system, already clogged, will not be able to handle all the disputes between landlords and tenants.
We did not make that recommendation. We were desperately anxious to get out of rent control and the red tape that went with it. desperately anxious.
I think it's revenge. It's the only thing that I can think of.
Tom Lalonde of the Greater Vancouver Renters Association could not believe his eyes when he read the bill.
And I think what this bill does is to throw that into utter chaos. They're going to be put at odds ends, and it's adding fuel to the fire. And I think that we could actually see, if you want to call it, a form of anarchy.
It seems both landlords and tenants do not want to go as far as Bill Bennett does. They may even get together to try to change his mind about the new bill. George Hamel, CBC News, Vancouver.
This week, Loblaws reported a quarterly profit of $508 million. But the grocery giant says store losses are up, thanks in part due to shoplifting. Sophia Harris looks at the theft in retail sector and the backlash against measures meant to stop it.
Mark Berry says a recent trip to this grocery store, owned by Loblaw, was humiliating. He says just before leaving the store, the wheels on his shopping cart suddenly locked.
And the alarm started blaring all at the same time.
How did that feel?
Incredibly embarrassing. I got people walking in all of a sudden staring at me like I've stolen something.
Berry says he had to show his receipt to prove his innocence and get the wheels unlocked. It left a lasting impression.
I don't want to come back to this store anymore.
The Retail Council of Canada says retail theft, including organized crime, is on the rise, so stores are beefing up security. However, some anti-theft tactics are sparking customer backlash. Retailers like Loblaw and Walmart have installed more metal gates with entry and exit points.
It was just belligerent.
Diane Ray says when she tried to leave Walmart on her mobility scooter, she was stopped by an employee at the gate.
It meant I wasn't going anywhere, right?
Ray says the employee demanded to see her receipt and peppered her with questions before letting her go.
I felt humiliated, angry. I was angry, and I felt like I was being treated unfairly, unjustly.
That's something that you could make a claim on.
This lawyer says retailers can't stop you from leaving a store unless they catch you stealing.
If you're blocked from leaving and you haven't done anything wrong, that indicates that they've engaged in potential false imprisonment, and that opens them up to a lawsuit.
Walmart told CBC News it wants customers to feel accepted and safe and is looking into Ray's case. Loblaw says its security measures are a work in progress and it welcomes customer feedback.
And it locks up, by itself.
Berry says he did give Loblaw his feedback on social media, but never heard back. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Waterloo, Ontario.
Political upheaval is rocking Niger in West Africa. The military has turned on the president. And as Peter Armstrong explains, his whereabouts are unknown and it's unclear who's in control.
In Niger's capital, supporters of the military coup attacked the governing party's headquarters. Yesterday, hundreds of people supporting deposed President Mohamed Bazoum were dispersed by gunfire. Presidential guards announced they're putting an end to the current regime. And that has clearly divided this country.
On est ici pour défendre la démocratie.
We are here to defend democracy, says this demonstrator at a pro-president rally.
Nous avons toujours cru à l'armée.
We have always believed in the army, says this man supporting the coup.
Cette armée.
This is just the latest in a series of coups in this region. Militaries seized power in Mali in 2020 and last year in Burkina Faso. Leaders in both countries have moved closer to Russia and away from the West. Experts say this week's coup presents a new opportunity for Russia to flex its regional muscles.
If the coup holds, if the putschists manage to survive, that might create this opening for Russia to try and strengthen its cooperation.
That is just part of what concerns the international community.
I am indeed extremely worried.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres points to a regional destabilization, not just in Mali and Burkina Faso, but Chad, Sudan, and now possibly Niger.
We are witnessing that the whole belt south of the Sahara is becoming an extremely problematic area with terrible consequences.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with Bazoum, a long-standing Western ally, Thursday morning.
We call for his immediate release. We condemn any effort to seize power by force.
The whereabouts of the president remain unknown, but it appears he's not going quietly. Via Twitter, Bazoum told his supporters their hard-won achievements will be safeguarded. For now, though, nothing here is safeguarded, and the next few days will prove pivotal for the country and indeed the entire region. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, London.
Ukraine said today that it has recaptured a village in the Donetsk region, and Russian President Vladimir Putin admits that Ukrainian attacks have intensified. But as Rebecca Collard reports, there was a change in tone today coming from Kyiv.
This Ukrainian counteroffensive really seems to be in full swing now. And what we've heard since the beginning of this counteroffensive, both from the Russian and the Ukrainian side, is essentially a lot of bravado. So Ukrainian and Russian forces claiming claiming victories on the battlefield. Ukraine claiming that it has taken territory, and Russia repeating that Ukraine hasn't been able to break through their defenses. Now, we heard something today that was a bit unusual from a Ukrainian general. He said that in fact this was going slower than they had hoped. They had hoped that this counteroffensive would be moving more quickly. Now, one of the reasons that is because of mines. So some of these areas that Ukraine is attempting to retake have been under Russian control for a year. Some other areas like Crimea have been under Russian control for more than a decade, and that has really given Russia a chance to dig its forces in, to plant mines, and to really create counter-defensive lines that are very difficult for Ukraine to break through. Today, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said that in fact Ukrainian forces had stepped up their offensive, but he claimed today that so far Ukraine hadn't been able to break through any of the Russian defenses. He also claimed that so far the Russian losses had been just a tenth of the Ukrainian losses. He didn't provide any evidence for that, and it is very difficult for us to know what's happening on the battlefield because there is so little independent reporting happening on these frontline areas. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
And then there were 8. We break down the finalists in our BC's Best Lakes competition and tell you how to cast your vote. That's coming up. Well, we have reached the quarterfinals of the search for BC's best lake, which means some regional champions are going to be determined by the end of tonight. In the Vancouver Island Division, Sprout Lake is up on Cowichan 55 to 45%, while the Southwest BC champion Garibaldi is up 57 to 43% over Alouette Lake. In the Battle of the Okanagan, Lake Okanagan itself is losing to nearby Kalamalka, 43 to 57%, while Shuswap Lake is defeating Emerald Lake, 59 to 41%. All four matchups are still pretty close, with voting open until 10 o'clock tonight. We'll have the semifinals and finals next week, with the province's best lake crowned right before BC Day. And speaking of Okanagan Lake, members of the Royal Canadian Navy have been conducting training drills on those waters.
Let go aft! Let go aft!
The Naval Security Team has 4 vessels out, practicing interception and response skills. The NST provides protection for high-value assets, ports, and harbors. Over the course of the training, the Navy will be going up and down the lake from Kelowna to Penticton to Vernon.
The Okanagan Lake is a perfect body of water for us to train in because it's hot here. There's a lot of traffic, and it really helps us just hone in and get our skill sets a lot higher. So, great.
The team has a 300 to 500 meter access zone around their operations, which means people can still watch the drills from the shore or on the water. Their last day of training on Okanagan Lake is tomorrow. All right, Darius Madavi is back. Darius, I'm going to get you to wade into this whole battle of the BC lakes. What do you think? You got thoughts?
I don't think I've been to enough of these lakes to have any real opinion. I just know that I'm going to go to whichever one the winner is. Going to make a weekend out of it, so that'll be fun.
Yes, that's a very good plan. You know what? It's a privilege to be able to travel around the province and go to so many of these lakes. So it's harder to do. You know who would probably know? That commanding officer. I'll bet from the Navy. He's got to have a favorite.
He must, and I feel like his vote should count more than mine, at least. Count more than mine.
All right, certainly. Yeah. All right, how are we looking on the weather front?
I want to take a little bit of time to just talk about some of those heat waves that we've talked about the last couple of weeks. We had 3 major heat waves in July in China, southern Europe, and the southern U.S. into Mexico. And we spent a lot of time talking about what was driving those heat waves. And I said a lot of the time something along the lines of climate change made it more likely or more intense. And now I finally have data to show just how much climate change did affect these heat waves. So the big thing to note here is this group did an analysis to find how likely these events would have been with and without climate change. And without climate change, some of these events would have been virtually impossible. We just wouldn't have seen temperatures that high. And now we'll see them every 1 in 5 years, like the one in China. The one in Europe could happen again every 10 years. And the US and Mexico likely to happen every 1 in 15 years. So very, very likely. Now, I'm going to just talk very briefly about how we know this. We plot how likely or how severe the heat wave was. We can draw a line from there to look at how likely it would have been without climate change, see if we can have those temperatures without climate change. In the case of this European heat wave, it just wouldn't have been possible. We never see this line modeling without climate change meet that line. And then we also can look at how much hotter the heat wave was as a result of climate change by drawing a line like this. So 2.5 degrees hotter as a result of climate change. That's how we do some of these attribution studies to really find out what is driving these heat waves, how much of a role climate change is playing. Now, if we look back at BC, no heat wave here. We do have a high pressure system pushing a lot of these showers into the province, which is why we have a lot of sun up here and plenty of rain throughout the rest of the province as it pushes a lot of those random showers throughout, but nothing here in Vancouver, nothing quite making it to us.
Yeah, it's looking pretty sunny. All right, thank you so much for that, Darius.
Thanks.
Over in Brazil, they're going humpback crazy. Whale lovers and researchers have teamed up to build a database of humpbacks. The project started in 2015 in response to a shortage of scientific data on the species in Brazilian waters. A crew sails a section of the southern coast to monitor the presence of individual whales and spotting unidentified ones. photos from whale watching excursions also help to build information. It all becomes part of the global Happy Whale Archive. Whales found in Brazil have been tracked as far away as Australia. Coming up, this Burnaby Wildlife Rescue Association is saving thousands of animals a year. We'll tell you why volunteers and staff are blaming Metro Vancouver's rapid growth.
Restaurant Farm sits on the highest point in Shamrock, PEI, 120 hectares of pasture for their sheep and cattle. These Wiltshire Horns are a heritage sheep, different from the ones that are coming to the island as part of this program. But they are also parasite resistant, and that's one of the reasons Margaret McCollum and her husband raised them.
What has developed, particularly in the last decade, people have realized what a crisis it is. A lot of the parasites have developed resistance to the drugs, and so we've got a problem that is really difficult to solve without looking at some of the more traditional methods of using resistant sheep and using forages.
That's why the PEI Sheep Breeders Association is spending $100,000 on world-class sheep genetics. More than 500 samples are coming from New Zealand.
With this funding, we're bringing in parasite-resilient genetics into the island sheep flock. There's a few flocks that we'll have the surgery done on, and then we'll be able to disseminate the genetics throughout the island flock.
That means eventually commercial sheep like these can be bred to become more parasite resilient. And that matters because there's a movement among farmers, including Daryl Stoltz, to get livestock out of the barn and into a pasture. It's better for the environment.
So at Intergrass, we don't have to cut the hay, rake the hay, bale the hay, haul the hay, wrap the hay. We just let the sheep eat it. The sheep does all that work, and so we save on our use of fossil fuels as well. When you haul all this stuff into, say, a barn, there's stuff that comes out the back end that needs hauled back out to the field.
But sheep that live outside are prone to parasites in their stomachs, and those parasites aren't responding to drugs the way they used to. So getting breeds that are resistant into the stock now matters. But these sheep haven't been gene tweaked. They're nature's solution to the parasite problem.
You're just finding out what are the genetic changes that nature came up with that will help us identify these animals going forward. So this isn't like genetically modified plants. You're not inserting DNA or anything.
Margaret McCollum's farm isn't part of the first phase of this program, but she does hope future generations will be part of her flock. This fall, the first batch of sheep semen arrives from New Zealand. A small number of ewes will be artificially inseminated, with the rest in 2024. Then, their offspring will be available to any breeder in PEI that wants to keep parasite-resistant sheep. Jackie Sharkey, CBC News, Bonshaw.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
We awarded British Columbia's Best Small Town. This summer, we're making a splash. It's the search for BC's Best Lake. Vote at cbc.ca/bestlakebc. And on August 6th, join the CBC Vancouver team at the 45th Annual Vancouver Pride Parade. The fun continues on at the Pride Festival. Make sure you drop by the CBC Vancouver tent and win some CBC swag.
Rapid development in Metro Vancouver is being blamed for causing the loss of natural habitat for local wildlife. The Wildlife Rescue Association says it gets an average of 20,000 calls a year through its helpline. We spoke to staff and volunteers about their rehabbing efforts.
So here at Wildlife Rescue, we take in injured and orphaned birds. We also take in bats and reptiles and amphibians, but the majority of our patients who are brought to us are birds. So here you can see several of our mallard ducklings. So right here we have about 20 who are just still several weeks away to be old enough to be released. Yeah, there's definitely a correlation between the urban growth and development in the area in correlation to the number of wildlife being brought into the center for attention. Of course, there's been a lot of development in the Metro Vancouver area since we were founded back in 1979. So as the city has grown and developed, we have seen a spike in number of animals. A lot of it also correlates with other natural disaster and weather events, such as oil spills and heat domes and cold spells and things like that as well.
Hydration looks good.
So we do receive a lot of phone calls where residents might be concerned about animals who are nesting in a place that may not be the best place. Maybe they're nesting on their front porch, they have babies in their nest, and they're dive bombing them every time they walk in and out of their house. So we have a hotline where our support center coordinators are able to kind of advise the finders and the community on how to handle those types of situations. We receive up to 20,000 phone calls a year from concerned citizens asking for advice on whether and what to do in situations with animals of concern to them, as well as we receive about 5,000 animals a year for care. It's really important to have centers like Wildlife Rescue Association of BC to assist in helping these animals. And most of the time that they are brought into us is because of human intervention. So we want to be able to be that voice for them and help them and get them back out into the wild and help to restore their balance in the ecological system.
Indeed, important work being done. That was a nice little piece from our colleagues on the Radio Canada side, so thanks for sharing that with us. All right, that's it for us tonight. Thank you for joining us on CBC News at 6. Benit will be here after the break, and I'll be back here, after the show at 11 o'clock. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a good night.